think of inequality as being composed of two components. Firstly, the inequality of assets, broadly defined, physical assets, human assets, in which we would include human capital, skill, and so on. And secondly, the return to these assets, the rate of return, the inequality in the rates of return to these assets. It's the combination of the inequality of assets and the inequality of the returns to these assets which give you total inequality. In fact, technical progress that's happening now, the trajectory of technical progress, the trajectory of innovation in production, in the organization of production, is such that the returns to capital are increasing faster than the returns to labor, and the returns to skilled labor are increasing faster than the returns to unskilled labor. That is a trajectory, and a business as usual scenario will mean increasing inequality for the next 20 to 25 years. Now, the answer to this is, of course, not to stop the technical progress, nor is it to stop the globalization, because in fact that is what is giving us the growth. That which is delivering the growth is also delivering the rising inequality. It seems to me that the other inequality, the inequality in the distribution of assets, is what policymakers have to try and address. Okay? The inequality in capital, inequality in skill, in education levels, and so on. So, one set of policies, is in fact to address these rises in inequality through more equitable distribution of social expenditure in education, in health, water, sanitation, and a broad range of social expenditures. But let me now raise the question of where will the resources come from? Corresponding, it seems to me, the resources will have to be raised through taxation. So we need a fiscal policy to raise the revenues to engage in the equitable social expenditure, which will lead to a more equal distribution of assets, which will counteract the global trend towards disequalization in the rates of return to these assets. The inequality of physical assets, the inequality which is being caused by a rise in the value of land, rise in the value of estate values in urban areas in Asia, is a major source of rising inequality in Asia. So there are massive resources available for governments to access, to raise revenues in order to implement equitable social expenditure. And I think the twin policies, equitable social expenditure and equitable taxation, particularly of urban values and urban real estate, I think is going to be an important component.
As we all know, China has made a remarkable progress in its social and economic development since it started opening and reforming process in late 1970s. Over 600 million people have been lifted out of poverty in China. More and more Chinese people have access to clean drinking water, access to basic medical service, and they have covered by the pension system and so on. The basic experience China has accumulated in promoting inclusive growth are first using the fiscal system, especially the transfer payment system, to help the poor people and also people living in central and western part of China. And also the government tried to adjust industrial layout, so promote the investment in central and the western region, and also improving social security system, promoting education, and so on. In China, we have really a huge population. Each year, we have over 7 million college graduates. At the same time, a lot of young people who don't have the access to college, they also need job opportunities. So job creation is always a huge challenge. Our Premier, Prime Minister, Mr. Li, made a statement earlier this year. He said the most important living issue for public actually is employment. And also the measure we take, including reforming the hukou system, that's a very special system in China, to reduce the barrier to labor mobility, and also try very hard to develop a private economy, encourage entrepreneurship, and facilitate the development of SMEs, strengthening job training, on-job training, vocational training, and also college education. Of course, even though we have taken a lot of measures to create jobs, China still faces a lot of challenge. Many other countries and economies, you also have a lot of good experience. So while sharing Chinese experience with others, I think China is also willing to learn from others.
If you look at several periods in China's history, that growth has been pro-poor. So you see, especially in the poorer parts, but also in the middle parts, you'll see really poverty being reduced or income going up in those deciles. So China did something right, clearly. If I look at the same slide for the Philippines, I don't see that pattern. So I see growth that even when it's high, it's not inclusive. It doesn't reach the poor, it doesn't reach the lower middle income classes. So why is that the case? It's about the structural transformation that we call the normal pattern of development. So the poor start out in rural areas, in agriculture. Things start to move in agriculture. Incomes get made, peasants get some money in their pocket, they spend it on industrial goods, basic industrial goods. Industrial capacity is created. Food prices go up, farmers invest more in their farms, and then when that industrial capacity is linked up to international markets, you get this export machine going, and many jobs in manufacturing are produced. That's basically China's story. If you look at the Philippines, the story is different. Agriculture never took off. Unlike many of the other East Asian countries, it didn't do a land reform program that really produced secure property rights for individual peasants. Manufacturing was protected, both from the outside, so lots of barriers to foreigners coming in, but maybe even more importantly, lots of barriers inside. So doing business for, say, small and medium-scale enterprise in the Philippines is extraordinarily difficult. We see the services sector in the Philippines growing, but actually these are most of them low-wage, low-skilled jobs. It's easy to say, you know, labor should move from agriculture or start making income there and then move to the cities. It's actually very difficult to get that transformation right. For that structural transformation to happen, land rights have to be clear. Businesses have to be able to respond to the increased growth and the demand. If you have a very complicated system which makes it very difficult for new business to set up, then that's very difficult to do. So economists have come here, looked at it, and they always cite the same set of reasons. Lack of competition, complex regulation, insecure property, lack of revenues, and that then leads to low agricultural productivity, weak manufacturing, informality, poverty, and out-migration. For inclusive growth in the Philippines, there's a long list of policy recommendations that are very well known and that have been repeated over the decades. I think now is the time that maybe the political economy provides some opportunity for coalitions to form, both at local level and at national level, to get a broader package of reform through.
Economic growth alone cannot automatically improve living standard of those who are stuck in the bottom of income distribution. So what is needed is deliberate policies targeting extreme poor who are left behind the growth process. Attention should also be given to those who are unable to escape poverty. I think, you know, Asia's growth has been effective in lifting people out of poverty, but its effectiveness diminishes when considering its impact on helping increase incomes of those who are unable to cross poverty line. Low coverage undermines the impact of social protection programs. Some 870 million people living in extreme poverty remain uncovered by any type of social safety nets. Inclusive growth is also concerned about reducing non-income inequalities. In Asia, inequity in education, particularly secondary and higher education, employment, and access to basic healthcare and infrastructure services has accompanied rising income inequality. An increase in aggregate growth does not always accompany more productive employment opportunities. Jobless growth in many parts of Asia is an example. With this jobless growth, the issues of high youth unemployment and skills mismatch have emerged. There might be various ways to address this issue, but one way could be through supporting technical and education and training. But the problem is that there is a low demand for such education in many parts of Asia because it is perceived to be of lower quality than university degrees. Inclusive growth is more than just a development goal, and it is necessary for achieving sustained and equitable growth. And to achieve inclusive growth, we need deliberate policies, particularly those concerning labor markets.
Ravi just mentioned the equity of assets as well as equity on the return to the assets. But I think the more important one actually is opportunity equity. Everyone have the equal opportunity, while the losing of the mobility of people in China provide this kind of mobility. So people from rural area, they can choose to be employed in the cities, and they can get a much higher wage.
When people migrate out of the Philippines, they accept jobs at a lower level than they were trained for. That's how much this has been an escape valve, basically, for the lack of opportunities here. Yeah? But a lot of migration we're talking about here is not a family leaving for better shores. It's single adult migration, mothers leaving their children behind, fathers never seeing their kids in years. The social costs of these are enormous. So I would really hope that given the comparative advantage that Philippine labor has, that it's finally now time for foreign direct investment to come in.
Brazil, Mexico, and so on have actually seen decreases in inequality, and these countries have faced the same global forces as everybody else. The forces of technical change, the forces of technical progress and globalization are faced by these countries as well. What they've done, going back to the Chinese analogy with the Chinese example, is with purposive policy they have addressed this thing. Not by shutting off the economies, but by investing to actually reduce the inequality of assets.
To determine whether growth has been inclusive or not, we need to look at all dimensions, growth, poverty, and inequality, how these three dimensions are interacting with each other. And then we have to look at the trade-offs among these three and then make a judgment. When we talked about pro-poor growth, that was much easier because when you talk about pro-poor growth, then we focus on just poor sections of the society. But when we talk about inclusive growth, we are dealing with the whole sections of the society, the whole distribution.
It's impossible to develop the whole China, a country big like this, at the same time, different part. And also, if you want to attract investment, no matter FDI or domestic investment, those investors, they will look at the comparative advantage different regions have. But now, the central government also noticed this kind of disparity among different regions. We are taking a lot of different measures to deal with this kind of issue. the large amount of transfer payment from the central government actually goes to the western part of China. The central government also encourage partnership among the provinces in different regions. Let's say encourage partnership between Shanghai and Xinjiang. Other provinces in the developed part and they also have a similar arrangement with their partners in the western part.
There are other dimensions of inequality between broadly defined socio-politically salient groups which turn out to be quite important. And I'll give you an example from Africa, which is from Ghana. In Ghana, the key structural socio-political divide is between the north of the country and the south of the country. The north is primarily Islamic, the south is Christian and animist. This is a key socio-political divide in the country. Ghana has done very, very well in terms of GDP measures. It has done very, very well in terms of poverty reduction. But actually, the divide between the north and the south has been growing in Ghana. Okay? And that is an explosive political cocktail. And it's that dimension of inequality which certainly I think economists often miss.
I'll just take a moment to briefly highlight some of the things that stood out in the conversation for me. One is that inclusive growth is a particular type of growth. It has to create jobs and provide broad opportunities for people to access those jobs. Inequality, as we've been hearing, is impeding the translation of growth into poverty reduction and impedes growth itself. Enhancing access by all to quality education is key to holding rising inequality in check. Labor market skills development is also essential to matching supply and demand for labor. And we repeatedly heard that social protection or aspects of social protection have a big role to play in addressing inequality and advancing inclusive growth. Programs like conditional cash transfers, active labor market programs, contributory pensions, and the like. There are different aspects to inequality, and there was reference here to access inequality of opportunity, measuring by income, different regions of a country. So when we're addressing inequality, one has to be specific about what aspect we're talking about. Taxation came up as a means to address inequality and also to fund some of the social programs. This could include more progressive taxes, property taxes. Labor migration entered into the discussion. It can raise living standards and fill gaps in the workforce. In the Philippines, a variety of specific issues, including the issue of land rights, lack of adequate competition among companies, but hopeful prospects of coalition building among different sectors of society and stakeholders to lobby for change that could lead to more inclusive growth patterns. And one other aspect that came up was the role of community development programs and targeted activity at the local level. So I'll just wind things up with that, but also inviting you to join me in a round of applause for our panelists, our experts.